Commander Zethkar had seen many species in his 4 decades of service with the Galactic Defense Coalition. The towering Vrex with their crystalline exoskeletons, the ethereal Mindari who communicated through pure thought, the slug-like Gorvins whose acidic secretions could melt through starship hulls. But humans? They were new to the galactic stage, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 standard cycles ago. Standing in the briefing room aboard the GDC flagship Eternal Vigil, Zethkar studied the dozen humans assigned to his strike team. They seemed impossibly fragile compared to his own people, the Keth Mori, where his kind stood nearly 3 meters tall with natural armor plating and razor-sharp claws. These humans barely reached 2 meters and appeared to be made of soft flesh and brittle bones. Their weapons looked primitive, kinetic projectile launchers that seemed laughably outdated compared to the plasma rifles and particle beams favored by most civilized species. "Attention, all personnel," announced Admiral Thexvor, her multiple eyes scanning the assembled strike teams. "Intelligence has confirmed that the Devourers have established a forward base on Kepler 442b. This marks their deepest incursion into Coalition space to date." A collective shudder ran through the non-human personnel. The Devourers were the stuff of nightmares, a hive-minded species that consumed all biological matter in their path. They had been steadily advancing through the outer rim for the past 5 years, leaving behind nothing but lifeless husks of worlds. "The mission is simple," the Admiral continued. "Infiltrate the base, gather intelligence on their next targets, and plant nuclear charges at key structural points. This is a precision operation. We get in, complete the objectives, and extract before they know we're there." Zethkar noticed that while every other species in the room showed signs of fear, elevated breathing, nervous twitching, pheromone emission, the humans remained perfectly calm. One of them, a female with short brown hair and sergeant stripes on her uniform, even appeared to be suppressing a yawn. After the briefing, Zethkar approached the human squad leader, a captain named Marcus Chun. "I am Commander Zethkar of the 3rd Keth Mori Regiment. My warriors, and I look forward to fighting alongside your people." Chun extended his hand, a human gesture Zethkar had learned about in cultural orientation. The human's grip was firm, but not aggressive. "Likewise, Commander. I've heard good things about Keth Mori tactical prowess." "If I may ask," Zethkar said, his translator struggling slightly with the diplomatic phrasing, "your people seem remarkably calm about this mission. Do you fully understand what we're facing?" Chen's expression grew serious. "We've been briefed on the Devourers, yes. 11-foot-tall insectoid killing machines with regenerative capabilities, hive-minded coordination, and a tendency to eat everything in sight." He paused, then smiled, an expression that Zethkar found somewhat unsettling. "Honestly, they sound like a cross between army ants and velociraptors. We've dealt with worse." Before Zethkar could ask what could possibly be worse than the Devourers, Chun was called away by his subordinates. The Keth Mori commander made a mental note to research human military history when he returned to his quarters. The drop to Kepler 442b went smoothly. The planet had once been a thriving agricultural world, home to the peaceful Zelani. Now, it was a wasteland of organic matter being processed into devourer biomass. The landscape looked like something from a fever dream, towering spires of hardened secretions, pulsing organic tubes that carried nutrients to unseen destinations, and everywhere the sound of clicking, chittering, and wet chewing. The Joint Strike Team moved through the nightmare terrain with practiced efficiency. Zethkar had to admit that despite their fragile appearance, the humans were surprisingly stealthy. They moved through the alien architecture with an almost predatory grace, their weapons held ready, but their movements economical and purposeful. It was Sergeant Sarah Martinez, the woman Zethkar had noticed suppressing a yawn during the briefing, who first spotted the patrol. 3 Devourers were making their round along what had once been a Zelani trading post. Each creature stood nearly 4 meters tall, their exoskeletons gleaming with acidic secretions, mandibles clicking in what Zethkar studies had identified as a form of echolocation. "Contact," Martinez whispered into her comm unit. "3 hostiles, approximately 50 meters northeast of our position." Chen's voice crackled back through the squad's communications. "Rules of engagement? Silent takedown if possible. We can't afford to alert the hive." What happened next would be burned into Zethkar's memory for the rest of his long life. Instead of the careful, coordinated assault he expected from a civilized military force, he watched in growing horror as the humans transformed into something else entirely. Martinez drew a combat knife, not an energy blade or a vibro weapon, but a simple piece of sharpened metal, and began moving toward the nearest devourer with movements that could only be described as predatory. Her breathing slowed, her eyes focused with laser intensity, and something in her expression shifted from professional soldier to apex predator. The other humans spread out with similar transformations. Private Jackson, a young man who had been joking with his squad mates moments earlier, now moved like a hunting cat. Corporal Thompson, who had spent the journey showing pictures of his children, held his rifle with the casual familiarity of someone born to kill. Zethkar watched in fascination and growing unease as Martinez reached the first devourer. The creature was easily twice her size, armed with natural weapons that could slice through starship armor, and possessed reflexes honed by millions of years of evolution as an apex predator. It never saw her coming. She struck from below, her knife finding the one weak spot in the creature's exoskeleton that even Keth Mori tactical manuals had listed as theoretically vulnerable but practically inaccessible in combat. The blade slid between chitinous plates with surgical precision, finding the main nerve cluster. The devourer dropped without a sound, its massive form crumpling like a marionette with severed strings. The second devourer began to turn, some instinct warning it of danger. Jackson's rifle spoke once, a barely audible whisper thanks to its suppressor, and a projectile no larger than Zethkar's claw punched through the creature's head with devastating effect. The kinetic round fragmented inside the skull, turning the devourer's brain into organic soup. The third creature managed to open its mandibles, perhaps to release a pheromone alarm, before Thompson's knife found its throat. The human had somehow climbed onto the creature's back in the space between one heartbeat and the next, moving with an agility that seemed to defy physics. 3 devourers, creatures that coalition forces typically engaged with full squads and heavy weapons, had been eliminated in under 10 seconds by 3 humans with primitive weapons and their bare hands. "Clear," Martinez reported, her voice as calm as if she had just completed a routine maintenance check. Zethkar realized his hands were shaking. Not from fear of the devourers, they were dead. He was shaking from what he had just witnessed the humans do to them. The mission continued deeper into the devourer complex. The architecture became more organic as they progressed, walls that pulsed with alien life, floors that yielded slightly underfoot like walking on flesh. The air grew thick with the scent of decay and alien pheromones that made Zethkar's respiratory system burn. The humans seemed completely unaffected. If anything, they appeared to be growing more alert, more focused, as if the increasingly hostile environment was energizing them rather than wearing them down. They encountered more patrols as they moved toward the central processing facility. Each engagement followed the same pattern: efficient, brutal, and terrifyingly swift. The humans didn't fight like civilized soldiers. They fought like the evolutionary apex predators their homeworld had forged them to be. During one encounter, Zethkar witnessed Private Jackson kill a devourer by grabbing its mandibles and using its own strength against it, twisting the creature's head until its neck snapped with a wet crack. The young human had smiled while doing it, not with joy or satisfaction, but with the simple contentment of a predator successfully completing a hunt. "Commander," Chen's voice came through the comm as they reached their first objective. "My technical specialist needs access to that control node. Can your people provide cover while she works?" Zethkar looked at the control node, a writhing mass of organic circuitry that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The very sight of it made his skin crawl. Of course, Captain. How long will she need? 5 minutes, maybe 10 if the encryption is more complex than we anticipated. The technical specialist turned out to be Martinez. Zethkar watched in amazement as the same woman who had killed the Devourer with a combat knife now interfaced with alien biotechnology using a device that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts. Humans are remarkably adaptable, Chen observed, noticing Zethkar's surprise. Sarah there has degrees in xenobiology and computer science. She can kill you 17 different ways with her bare hands, hack into systems that shouldn't even be comprehensible to our neural architecture, and still have time to send a letter to her grandmother back on Earth. Your species is unusual, Zethkar managed. We prefer versatile. Chen's smile was back, that slightly unsettling expression that never quite reached his eyes. Where we come from, you had to be good at everything if you wanted to survive. Kill or be killed, adapt or die. It made us very good at learning new ways to solve problems. Before Zethkar could respond, Martinez's voice cut through their conversation. Got it. Their next target is the Vrex homeworld. They're planning to hit it in 3 standard days. Chen's expression hardened. The Vrex crystal cities have a population of 12 billion. Not if the Devourers get there first, Martinez replied grimly. According to this data, they've developed some kind of new bioweapon, something that breaks down crystalline structures. They're specifically targeting the Vrex because their cities will provide raw materials for constructing a new hive ship. Zethkar felt his blood turn cold. The Vrex were among the oldest members of the coalition, their crystal cities marvels of engineering that had stood for millennia. The thought of them being dissolved into devour biomass was almost too horrible to contemplate. How long do we have? Chen asked. 48 hours before the attack fleet launches. Maybe 50 if we're lucky. Then, we'd better move fast. Chen activated his squad comm. All units, double time to Objective 2. We need those nuclear charges planted yesterday. The journey to the second objective took them deeper into the facility's heart, where the walls themselves seemed to breathe and ambient lighting came from bioluminescent organs embedded in the ceiling. The air grew so thick with alien pheromones that Zethkar's filtration systems were struggling to process it. The humans remained unaffected, their movements becoming more fluid and predatory with each passing meter. It was as if the increasingly hostile environment was calling to something primal in their genetic code, awakening instincts that civilized evolution should have left behind eons ago. They encountered their first major resistance at a junction where 5 corridors converged. A full pack of Devourers, 8 individuals working in perfect coordination, blocked their path. Coalition doctrine called for orbital bombardment or heavy weapons when facing a pack. They had neither. Standard flanking maneuver, Chen ordered, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had done this countless times before. What followed was not a battle in any sense that Zethkar understood. It was a hunt, with the humans moving through the Devourer pack like wolves among sheep. They used the aliens' own coordination against them, exploiting the split-second delays in hive mind communication to strike at multiple targets simultaneously. Martinez killed 3 Devourers in the space of 15 seconds, her movements flowing from one attack to the next with balletic grace. Jackson and Thompson worked as a team, using their environment to their advantage by causing a section of the organic ceiling to collapse onto 2 of the creatures. Chun himself took down the pack leader with his bare hands, somehow getting inside its guard and crushing its throat before it could react. The entire engagement lasted less than 2 minutes. 8 Devourers lay dead, their green ichor pooling on the floor, while not a single human had suffered more than superficial scratches. Objective 2 achieved, Martinez reported as she finished planting the first nuclear charge. Timer set for 2 hours. They moved to the third objective, the facility's main nursery chamber, without encountering further resistance. The lack of patrols should have been reassuring, but Zethkar found himself growing more nervous rather than less. In his experience, when an enemy pulled back their forces, it usually meant they were preparing something unpleasant. The nursery chamber was a vast cavern filled with organic pods, each one containing developing devourer larvae. The sight was horrifying even by Zeth-Kar's standards. Thousands upon thousands of creatures in various stages of development, from barely formed grubs to nearly mature specimens that would soon join the hive. "Jesus," whispered Private Jackson, the first sign of emotion Zeth-Kar had seen from any of the humans since the mission began. "Definitely need to make sure this place burns," Martinez agreed, already moving toward the chamber's central support column with another nuclear charge. It was Chen who noticed the trap first. Movement in the upper galleries. "Looks like we've got company." Zeth-Kar looked up to see dozens of devourers emerging from concealed positions throughout the chamber. They had walked into an ambush, outnumbered at least 20-1 with no cover and no retreat. Any rational military force would have attempted a fighting withdrawal, hoping to reach an extraction point before being overwhelmed. The humans did something else entirely. "Weapons free," Chen ordered, his voice carrying a note that made Zeth-Kar's first stand on end. "Show them what happens when you threaten our friends." The humans spread out across the chamber floor, their movements synchronized despite having no apparent communication. They weren't retreating or seeking defensive positions. They were positioning themselves for maximum killing efficiency. What happened next would haunt Zeth-Kar's dreams for years to come. The humans didn't fight like soldiers defending themselves against overwhelming odds. They fought like apex predators culling a herd. Martinez's rifle spoke in measured bursts, each shot precisely placed to bring down a devourer with minimal ammunition expenditure. Jackson had somehow acquired a devourer claw weapon and was using it to devastating effect, his enhanced strength allowing him to wield the alien weapon with terrifying precision. Thompson had produced what appeared to be explosive charges from his pack and was systematically bringing down sections of the chamber's ceiling onto clusters of enemies. Chun moved through the chaos like a force of nature, his combat knife carving through devourer exoskeletons as if they were paper. But it wasn't just his physical prowess that terrified Zeth-Kar. It was the expression on his face. The human captain was smiling, a cold, predatory expression that held absolutely no warmth or mercy. The battle raged for nearly 20 minutes, an eternity when facing overwhelming odds. Gradually, the tide turned. The Devourers' coordination began to break down as their numbers dwindled, their hive mind struggling to process the systematic destruction of their forces. By the end, the chamber floor was carpeted with alien corpses, green ichor flowing in rivers toward the drainage channels. For humans stood among the carnage, barely breathing hard, checking their equipment with the casual efficiency of professionals completing routine maintenance. "All charges placed and armed," Martinez reported. "Nursery chamber is ready for sterilization." Zeth-Kar looked around the chamber in stunned disbelief. 37 devourers lay dead. He had counted them during the battle, unable to look away from the systematic slaughter. The humans had not only survived an encounter that should have killed them all, they had won decisively. "Ow?" he asked, his translator barely managing to process the shock in his voice. Chen looked at him with those predator's eyes, and, for a moment, Zeth-Kar saw something that chilled him to his core. Behind the human's civilized exterior lurked something far older and infinitely more dangerous than any devourer could ever be. "Commander," Chun said quietly, "where we come from, we weren't always at the top of the food chain. We had to fight our way there, one corpse at a time. The universe is full of monsters, but the thing monsters fear most is finding out they're not the only apex predator in the galaxy." As they made their way toward the extraction point, Zeth-Kar found himself watching the humans with new eyes. He had spent the entire mission thinking of them as fragile allies who needed protection. Now he realized the truth was exactly the opposite. The humans weren't the ones who needed protecting. They were the ones everyone else should fear. The extraction should have been the easy part. According to the mission plan, they would plant the final charges at the facility's main power core, transmit their intelligence back to the Coalition fleet, and wait for pickup at the designated landing zone. Simple, clean, efficient. But As Commander Zethkar had learned over his decades of military service, operations rarely went according to plan. And when humans were involved, he was beginning to suspect that according to plan was more of a suggestion than a requirement. The first sign of trouble came when they reached the facility's central core. The chamber was enormous, stretching up into darkness beyond their light's reach, with the Devourer power source, a pulsing organic mass the size of a small building, suspended in the center by biomechanical tendons that thrummed with energy. "That's not in the intelligence briefings," Sergeant Martinez observed, studying the readings on her scanner. "The power output is at least 3 times what we were told to expect." Captain Chun frowned as he examined the structure. "Which means either our intel was wrong, or they've been making upgrades since the reconnaissance mission." "Sir," Private Jackson called from where he was examining one of the chamber's walls. "You need to see this." The wall Jackson had found was covered in what looked like star charts, bioluminescent patterns that shifted and pulsed in complex sequences. But these weren't just random alien decorations. Zethkar recognized the stellar configurations, and what he saw made his blood freeze. "Those are Coalition worlds," he whispered, his translator struggling with his shock. "All of them. Every major population center, every military installation, every industrial facility." Martinez ran her scanner over the display, her expression growing grimmer with each reading. "It's not just intelligence gathering. These are target designations. And look at this." She pointed to a section where the patterns pulsed faster and brighter. "These systems are marked for immediate assault." The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. They're not just expanding randomly. They're planning a coordinated strike against the entire coalition. "How long until they launch?" Chen asked, his voice deadly calm. Based on the energy patterns and what we learned from the other data caches, Martinez calculated rapidly, maybe 6 standard hours. 8 at the outside. Thompson, who had been quietly examining the power core's base structure, looked up with an expression that somehow managed to be both grim and anticipatory. "Good news and bad news, Captain. Good news is that I can plan enough explosives to take this whole facility off the map. Bad news is that the power core is directly connected to their communication grid. When it goes dark, every devourer in the system is going to know exactly where we are." She nodded slowly. "How long do we have between detonation and the cavalry arriving?" "Maybe 30 minutes if we're lucky. 20 if we're not." "And how long until our extraction team can reach us?" Martinez checked her communications gear, her expression darkening further. "That's another problem. I'm getting interference from the power core. I can't reach the fleet to update our pickup time or location." Zethkar felt the familiar weight of impending doom settling on his shoulders. They were trapped in an enemy facility, surrounded by hostile forces, with no way to communicate with friendly units, and a rapidly approaching deadline that would determine the fate of the entire galactic civilization. In his experience, this was the point where even the most disciplined troops began to show signs of panic. Elevated stress indicators, nervous movements, the subtle pheromone releases that indicated fear responses among his own people. He looked at the humans, expecting to see similar signs of stress. Instead, he saw something that made his scales crawl with unease. The humans were becoming calmer, more focused, as if the desperate nature of their situation was somehow sharpening their concentration rather than degrading it. Their movements grew more economical, their voices quieter, and their eyes took on that predatory intensity he had witnessed during the earlier firefights. "Change of plans," Chen announced, his tone carrying the absolute authority of someone who had made life-or-death decisions so many times it had become routine. "We're not waiting for extraction. We're fighting our way out." "Sir," Jackson said with what sounded suspiciously like anticipation, "there are probably thousands of devourers between us and the surface." Chen's smile was back, that cold expression that never quite reached his eyes. "I know. Thompson, how much ordnance do we have left?" The demolitions expert did a quick inventory of his remaining supplies. "Enough to level half this facility, if we're creative about placement." Martinez, can you rig the communication system to broadcast our intel to the Coalition fleet on a time delay? Give me 20 minutes with their biotech interfaces, and I can make it sing opera if you want. Jackson, what's our ammunition status? Sufficient for immediate needs, sir. And there's always battlefield acquisition if we run low. Zethkar realized with growing horror that the humans weren't just planning to fight their way out of the facility. They were planning to turn their escape into a systematic destruction of the entire Devour operation. The scale of the undertaking was insane, the odds of success virtually non-existent, and the likely casualty rate approaching 100%. Captain Chun, he said carefully, while I admire your species' courage, perhaps we should consider alternatives. If we could find a defensive position and wait for reinforcements, Commander, Chen interrupted gently. There are no reinforcements coming. The Coalition fleet is 3 days away, minimum. By the time they get here, the Devourer attack fleet will have launched, and our friends will be dead. He paused, studying Zethkar's expression. Besides, defense isn't really our strong suit. We're much better at aggressive problem-solving. Over the next 20 minutes, Zethkar watched the humans transform their desperate situation into a carefully orchestrated campaign of destruction. Martinez interfaced with the alien communication systems using techniques that seemed to combine advanced xenobiology with intuitive understanding of hostile biotechnology. She worked with the focused intensity of a master craftsman, her hands moving across the organic interfaces with surprising gentleness. Whoever designed this stuff had a really twisted sense of aesthetics, she muttered as she worked. But the underlying architecture is actually pretty elegant. It's like a biological version of quantum entanglement networking. Thompson, meanwhile, was placing his remaining explosives with the precision of an artist creating a masterpiece. Each charge was positioned to maximize structural damage while creating a cascading failure that would bring down increasingly large sections of the facility. The trick, he explained to Zethkar as he worked, is to let physics do most of the work. You don't need to blow up everything. You just need to blow up the right things and let momentum and gravity handle the rest. Jackson was stripping weapons and equipment from the Devourer corpses littering the chamber, field-testing alien armaments with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. Crude, but effective, he reported after examining a claw launcher weapon. The projectiles are essentially guided bone fragments with explosive tips. Range is limited, but the penetration is impressive. Chun coordinated it all with the calm authority of a conductor directing a symphony. He moved between his subordinates, offering suggestions, making adjustments to the plan, and gradually transforming their desperate situation into something that looked almost manageable. Almost. Time, Martinez announced as she finished her work with the communication systems. Intel package will transmit automatically in 90 minutes. That should give the Coalition fleet enough warning to intercept the attack flotilla. Charges are set and synchronized, Thompson reported. Cascade detonation will begin in 45 minutes and level this entire facility in under an hour. Weapons acquired and distributed, Jackson added, handing Zethkar one of the alien claw launchers. Local ammunition is plentiful, assuming we can keep killing Devourers. Shin nodded with satisfaction. Outstanding. Now comes the fun part. Zethkar was beginning to understand that when humans describe something as fun, it usually involved massive amounts of violence and destruction. This occasion proved no exception. Their ascent through the facility was less an escape and more a controlled rampage. The humans moved through the organic corridors like a natural disaster, leaving destruction in their wake. They used the alien architecture against its creators, collapsing sections of ceiling to block pursuit routes, rupturing bioconduits to create environmental hazards, and turning the Devourer's own communication networks against them by feeding false information through compromised nodes. The first major engagement came when they encountered a full defensive formation. 20 Devourers arranged in overlapping fields of fire across a large chamber that had once been a Zalani residential district. The aliens had learned from their earlier encounters and were no longer trying to hunt the humans. Instead, they had set up a killing field designed to eliminate any force attempting to pass through. It should have been an impregnable position. The Devourers had superior numbers, better positioning, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. By any rational military analysis, the humans should have been forced to retreat or find an alternate route. Instead, Chun smiled and said, "Martinez, Thompson, I need a distraction. Jackson, you're with me. Commander Zethkar, I'd appreciate it if you could provide covering fire from this position." Before Zethkar could ask what they meant by distraction, Martinez and Thompson had disappeared into the facility's maintenance systems. Moments later, a section of the chamber's wall exploded inward, showering the Devourer position with debris and organic matter. As the aliens turned to respond to the breach, Jackson and Chun attacked from an entirely different direction. The engagement that followed was unlike anything in Zethkar's military experience. The humans didn't fight as a unit in the traditional sense. Instead, they fought as individual predators working toward a common goal, each one exploiting the chaos created by the others to maximum effect. Martinez emerged from her demolition work to find 3 Devourers had their backs turned to her. She killed all 3 before they could react, her movements flowing from target to target with mechanical precision. Thompson used his remaining explosives not as weapons, but as tools, creating new cover positions and eliminating enemy advantages with surgical applications of controlled destruction. Jackson and Chun moved through the enemy formation like ghosts, appearing behind targets that thought they were safely positioned, striking with overwhelming violence, and disappearing before the hive mind could coordinate a response. The battle lasted 8 minutes and left 20 Devourers dead without a single human casualty. "Ow!" Zethkar asked as they regrouped and continued their ascent. "How do you make it look so easy?" "Practice," Chun replied simply. "And good genes. Our species spent a few million years learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and better armed than we were. You pick up techniques." Their next encounter came at what had once been the facility's main processing center. Here, the Devourers had prepared a more sophisticated trap. The chamber was a maze of organic machinery and bioconduits, providing numerous hiding spots and ambush points. More importantly, they had herded civilian prisoners, surviving Zilani from the planet's original population, into the center of the maze as human shields. 67 Zilani survivors, Martinez reported after scanning the chamber. They're being held in individual biocages distributed throughout the maze. The Devourers have positioned themselves so that any assault would result in massive civilian casualties. Zethkar felt his heart sink. The Zilani were pacifists by nature, with no military capabilities and no way to defend themselves. Using them as shields was a classic Devourer tactic, and one that had proven devastatingly effective against coalition forces. "Standard tactical assessment?" Chin asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Impossible," Zethkar replied honestly. "Any assault would result in unacceptable civilian losses. Coalition doctrine would require us to withdraw and request specialized hostage rescue units, which would take how long to arrive? Minimum of 6 standard days. And by then, both the civilians and the coalition would be dead." Chin studied the maze's layout on Martinez's scanner, his expression thoughtful. "What if I told you we could extract all 67 civilians while simultaneously eliminating every Devourer in the chamber?" Zethkar stared at him. "I would say that's impossible. We prefer improbable. Give us 20 minutes. What followed was the most precisely coordinated military operation Zethkar had ever witnessed. The humans didn't just assault the maze. They systematically dismantled it, turning the Devourer's trap into their own hunting ground. Martinez used her technical skills to hack into the biocage control systems, creating timed releases that would free the prisoners in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Thompson placed microcharges throughout the maze structure, designed to create new passages and eliminate enemy cover without harming the civilians. Jackson and Chin moved through the maze like hunting cats, their knowledge of the facility's layout allowing them to predict and intercept Devourer movements. The operation unfolded with clockwork precision. As each biocage opened, its occupant was immediately guided to safety by one of the humans. As each Devourer moved to intercept the escaping prisoners, they found themselves isolated and vulnerable to attack from unexpected angles. Within 18 minutes, all 67 Zilani had been extracted to safety and 32 Devourers lay dead throughout the maze. The rescued Zilani were in poor condition, malnourished, traumatized, and suffering from various injuries inflicted by their captors. Under normal circumstances, they would have required immediate medical attention and careful psychological support. But these are not normal circumstances, and time was rapidly running out. Can they travel? Chun asked Martinez, who was conducting quick medical assessments. Not far and not fast, she replied. Most of them are severely weakened. They'll need support. Then we'll provide it. Chun activated his communication gear and began speaking in rapid, precise sentences. Command override Alpha 77. Priority evacuation of civilian personnel. All units converge on my position for immediate extraction support. Zethkar looked around the chamber, seeing only the 4 humans of Chen's squad. Captain, what other units? We're alone. Chen's smile was back, but this time it held a note of genuine warmth. Commander, you're thinking like someone who's used to having support. We learned a long time ago to be our own cavalry. The ascent to the surface became a running battle as the facility's remaining defenders converged on their position. But now the engagement had changed character entirely. The humans were no longer fighting to escape. They were fighting to protect 67 helpless civilians while simultaneously destroying a military installation and gathering intelligence that would save billions of lives. It should have been impossible. The tactical requirements were contradictory, the resource limitations severe, and the time constraints absolute. But somehow, the humans made it work. They moved through the facility like a precisely coordinated machine, each member of the squad fulfilling multiple roles simultaneously. Martinez served as medic, technical specialist, and sniper as circumstances required. Thompson was demolitions expert, combat engineer, and heavy weapons specialist all in one. Jackson functioned as scout, assault specialist, and field commander when Chen's attention was needed elsewhere. And Chun himself seemed to be everywhere at once, coordinating the civilian evacuation, directing tactical movements, managing their remaining resources, and personally engaging the most dangerous threats they encountered. As they neared the surface, Zethkar began to understand something fundamental about humanity that all the intelligence briefings and cultural orientation sessions had failed to convey. These weren't just soldiers following orders or even warriors fighting for their cause. They were apex predators defending their pack, and there was literally nothing in the galaxy that would stop them from completing their mission. The facility's main entrance was heavily fortified, with multiple Devourer positions covering all approaches. The original landing zone was compromised, under heavy enemy fire, and would be untenable for extraction. Their communication equipment was still being jammed by the power core's interference. They had exhausted most of their ammunition and explosive charges, and in 30 minutes, Thompson's demolition charges would begin their cascade detonation, bringing down the entire facility. Any rational assessment would conclude that they were trapped with no hope of escape. But, as Zethkar was learning, humans had very different ideas about what constituted no hope. The surface of Kepler 442b had been transformed into something from a nightmare. Where once fertile farmlands had stretched to the horizon, now twisted spires of hardened biomatter reached toward the sky like grasping claws. The very air seemed thick with malevolent purpose, and every shadow could hide a dozen devourers waiting to strike. Commander Zethkar crouched behind a formation of crystallized devourer secretions, his weapon trained on the approaches, while Captain Chin studied their tactical situation through enhanced optics. Around them, 67 Zilani civilians huddled together, their large eyes reflecting terror and exhaustion in equal measure. Perimeter is locked down tight, Chen reported quietly. I count at least 40 contacts between us and the original extraction point. They've got overlapping fields of fire and what looks like prepared positions. Sergeant Martinez looked up from her medical kit, where she had been treating a young Zalani female with severe malnutrition. The civilians aren't going to last much longer. Even if we could fight through those positions, most of them can't make a forced march to the landing zone. Then, we don't go to the landing zone, Private Jackson said from his position, scanning the alien landscape. We make a new one. Thompson nodded toward a raised plateau approximately 2 kilometers to the east. That ridge line has clear sight lines in all directions and solid ground for a heavy transport. If we can reach it and hold it long enough for extraction, our people can land there instead. Chin studied the proposed position through his optics, calculating angles of fire and defensive possibilities. It's defensible, but getting there means crossing open ground while protecting 67 non-combatants. And we've got maybe 25 minutes before this place goes nuclear, Martinez added, checking her chronometer. Zethkar looked between the humans, noting their calm discussion of what appeared to be an impossible tactical situation. You're seriously considering fighting through 40 devourers while escorting civilian refugees across 2 kilometers of open terrain? We prefer to think of it as aggressive problem-solving, Chen replied with that unsettling smile. Thompson, what's our ordnance situation? 3 fragmentation grenades, 2 smoke canisters, and enough plastic explosive for maybe 4 more shaped charges. Ammunition, 47 rounds for the primary weapons, plus whatever we can scavenge from devour corpses. Medical supplies? Enough for basic field treatment. Nothing major. Chin nodded slowly, then turned to address the Zalani civilians. When he spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that seemed almost alien coming from someone Zethkar had watched kill dozens of enemies with mechanical efficiency. I know you're all frightened and exhausted, he said, his translator converting his words into the melodic tones of the Zalani language. But we're going to get you out of here. I need you to stay together, follow our instructions exactly, and trust us to handle the dangerous parts. Can you do that for us? An elderly Zalani male, his fur gray with age, but his eyes still sharp, stepped forward to serve as spokesman for the group. Captain Chun, we have heard the stories of human warriors. We will follow where you lead. Good? Here's what we're going to do. The plan Chen outlined was simultaneously brilliant and insane. Using Thompson's remaining explosives, they would create a series of diversionary attacks on the Devourer positions, drawing the aliens' attention away from the ridgeline. Meanwhile, Martinez would lead the civilians in a wide flanking movement that would keep them out of the direct line of fire while slowly advancing toward the extraction point. Jackson and Chin would serve as the primary assault team, using their remaining ammunition and scavenged Devourer weapons to systematically eliminate enemy strongpoints. Zethkar would provide overwatch and covering fire, his enhanced optics and long-range weapon giving him the ability to engage threats at maximum range. It was a plan that required perfect timing, flawless execution, and more than a little luck. It was also their only hope of getting the civilians to safety before the facility's destruction caught up with them. One more thing, Chen added as they prepare to move out. The Devourers learn fast. They've adapted their tactics based on our previous engagements. Expect them to be smarter, more coordinated, and more aggressive than what we faced inside. He was proven correct within the first 5 minutes of the operation. Thompson's initial diversionary explosion successfully drew the attention of a significant portion of the Devourer force. But instead of rushing to investigate as they had done previously, the aliens split into coordinated hunting groups. One group moved to investigate the explosion, while others began systematically sweeping the area for hidden enemies. Their thinking, Martinez observed as she guided the civilians through a depression that provided temporary concealment. This isn't just hive mind coordination anymore. They're showing individual initiative. Chun and Jackson encountered the first patrol group while advancing on their primary target, a Devourer heavy weapons position that commanded the approach to the ridgeline. The engagement was brief, but vicious, with both humans forced to use every trick they had learned over the course of the mission. Contact! Jackson's voice crackled through the comm system. 4 hostiles, moving in coordinated pairs. They're using suppression fire and advanced tactics. Zethkar watched through his scope as the 2 humans engaged enemies that were now fighting with something approaching military intelligence. The Devourers had learned to use cover effectively, to coordinate their attacks for maximum effect, and to adapt their tactics based on human responses. It made them infinitely more dangerous. The firefight lasted nearly 8 minutes, an eternity when every second counted toward their rapidly approaching deadline. When it ended, 4 more Devourers lay dead, but both Jackson and Chun had sustained injuries. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to slow them down and reduce their combat effectiveness. Status report. Chun called as he applied a field dressing to a claw wound on his left arm. Civilians are approximately halfway to the ridge line, Martinez reported. They're moving as fast as they can, but we're talking about beings who've been imprisoned and starved for months. Primary strong point is neutralized, Jackson added, but I'm seeing movement from at least 3 more positions. They're repositioning to cut off our route to the extraction point. Thompson's voice came through with the calm professionalism of someone discussing routine maintenance. Cascade detonation begins in 14 minutes. After that, the blast effects are going to make this area very unfriendly very quickly. Zethkar found himself wondering if the humans ever experienced fear the way other species did. They discussed their deteriorating situation with the same calm efficiency they had shown when the mission was going smoothly. If anything, the increasing danger seemed to sharpen their focus rather than degrade it. Change of plans, Chun announced. Thompson, I need you to rejoin Martinez and the civilians. Get them to the ridge line and prepare a defensive perimeter. Jackson and I will deal with the remaining strong points. Sir, Thompson replied. That's going to leave you badly outnumbered. Numbers have never been our strong suit anyway. We'll manage. As Thompson moved to rejoin the civilian group, Zethkar found himself alone with Chun and Jackson as they prepared to assault what appeared to be a reinforced Devourer command position. The aliens had taken over what remained of a Zalani administrative building, using its elevated position and structural remains to create an almost impregnable fortress. Commander, Chun said quietly, this would be a good time for you to rejoin the others. What we're about to do doesn't require a witness. Something in a human's tone made Zethkar's skin crawl. What exactly are you planning? Something that violates about 17 different articles of the Galactic Warfare Convention. Jackson replied matter-of-factly. Plus a few that probably haven't been written yet. Chin's expression had shifted into something that reminded Zethkar uncomfortably of a hunting predator contemplating its prey. The thing about rules of engagement, Commander, is that they only apply when both sides follow them. The Devourers eat civilian populations alive. That tends to put them outside the protection of civilized law. Before Zethkar could ask what they meant, both humans had begun moving toward the enemy position with movements that were no longer entirely human. They flowed across the broken terrain like shadows given deadly purpose, their weapons held ready, but their approach relying more on stealth and positioning than firepower. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was an execution carried out with surgical precision and absolute ruthlessness. The humans had clearly studied the Devourer position during their approach, identifying weak points and planning their assault down to the smallest detail. Jackson struck first, using a shaped charge to breach the building's rear wall exactly where the structure's support framework was most vulnerable. The explosion brought down a significant section of the alien's defensive position while simultaneously providing Chun with a clear approach route. The Devourers inside the building had perhaps 30 seconds to react before both humans were among them. Moving through the confined space with a fluid coordination of apex predators working together to bring down prey. The sounds that emerged from the building during those 30 seconds would haunt Zethkar's dreams for years afterward. Not just the obvious noises of combat, weapons fire, impact sound, structural damage, but the other sounds. The wet noises of organic matter being separated from its supporting structures. The grinding sounds of hard surfaces being abraded beyond their design limits. And, underneath it all, a rhythmic pounding that took Zethkar several moments to identify as the sound of human fists impacting devourer exoskeletons at velocities that should have shattered human bones. When the sound stopped, Chun and Jackson emerged from the ruins looking like they had walked through a slaughterhouse. Their uniforms were soaked with green ichor, their weapons empty, and their hands covered in substances that Zethkar preferred not to identify. Strong point neutralized. Chun reported with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout the mission. How many? Zethkar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. 12 confirmed, Jackson replied, checking his weapon and beginning to strip ammunition from devourer corpses. Possibly 13 if that last one doesn't regenerate. They moved quickly toward the ridge line, where Martinez had successfully guided the civilian group to relative safety. The position was indeed defensible, with clear sight lines and solid cover, but it was also completely exposed to the blast effects that would soon be emanating from the facility below. Extraction team status? Chun asked as they reached the perimeter. Still no communication, Martinez replied grimly. The power core interference is blocking everything. They don't know about our change of location. Thompson looked up from where he was distributing captured devourer weapons to supplement their depleted ammunition supplies. Cascade detonation in 6 minutes. After that, we'll have maybe 3 minutes of relative safety before the shock waves reach this position. Zethkar looked around their small defensive perimeter. For humans, 1 Kethmori warrior, and 67 helpless civilians on an exposed ridge line with no communication and no way to signal for help. Below them, an alien facility was preparing to explode with the force of multiple nuclear weapons. Around them, an unknown number of devourer forces were undoubtedly converging on their position. By any rational military analysis, they were all going to die. But, as he had learned over the course of this mission, humans had a fundamentally different relationship with impossible odds than any other species he had encountered. Martinez, Chun ordered calmly, start working on a signal amplifier using devourer biotech components. If you can punch through the interference for even a few seconds, that might be enough to reach the extraction team. Thompson, I need you to survey the ridge line for anything we can use as an improvised landing pad. The extraction ships are going to need solid ground and clear approaches. Jackson, help me establish firing positions. If the devourers decide to rush us, I want overlapping fields of fire with maximum effective range. Commander Zethkar, Chun added, turning to face him directly, I need you to coordinate the civilian evacuation when our ride arrives. Your people have experience with mass casualty logistics, and the Zalani trust you. As the humans began implementing their plan with the same mechanical efficiency they had shown throughout the mission, Zethkar realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic military history. These 4 individuals were not just soldiers following orders or warriors fighting for honor. They were problem solvers who refused to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. The facility's destruction began exactly on schedule. Thompson's cascade detonation system worked flawlessly, sending a rolling series of explosions through the underground complex that grew in intensity as each successive blast triggered the next. The initial explosions were almost anticlimactic, distant rumbles that barely shook the ground beneath their feet. But as the cascade reached the central power core, the character of the destruction changed dramatically. The explosion that followed lit up the alien landscape like a second sun, sending a mushroom cloud of vaporized biomatter kilometers into the atmosphere. The shock wave that followed was powerful enough to knock down several of the weaker Zalani civilians and shatter the crystallized secretion formations that dotted the landscape. Phase 1 complete, Thompson observed with professional satisfaction. Facility is now officially off the map. Contact, Jackson called from his overwatch position. Multiple bogies approaching from the southeast. Looks like the surviving garrison is coming to investigate. Through his enhanced optics, Zethkar could see them. At least 20 devourers moving across the broken landscape with obvious hostile intent. The aliens had apparently decided that eliminating the human team was worth exposing themselves to the ongoing destruction below. Range? Chun asked, checking his weapon and taking position behind a formation of local stone. 800 meters and closing. They'll be in effective range in approximately 2 minutes. Martinez looked up from her improvised communication device, where she had been attempting to combine human electronics with salvaged Devourer biotech. I might have something. The biocomponents are actually compatible with our quantum communicators, but the interface is going to be unstable. How unstable? I might get one clear transmission before the whole thing burns out. Then, we better make it count. The approaching Devourers had learned from their previous encounters with the humans. Instead of charging directly into the human defensive positions, they were using the terrain to their advantage, moving in coordinated groups with covering fire and tactical communications. They had also apparently acquired some kind of long-range weapon system, because energy bolts began impacting the ridgeline well before they came into range of human small arms. Incoming fire, Jackson reported, ducking behind cover as a bolt of acidic energy melted a section of stone mere centimeters from his position. They've got some kind of artillery support. Chun studied the approaching aliens through his optics, calculating ranges and approach vectors with the cold precision of a predator planning a hunt. They're being smart about this, setting up a siege rather than a direct assault. Smart doesn't help them if they're too late, Thompson observed, pointing toward the facility below. The cascade detonation was continuing to spread, with secondary explosions now reaching the peripheral structures. In about 2 minutes, anything within 5 kilometers of ground zero is going to have a very bad day. Including us? Oh, definitely including us. The question is whether our extraction team shows up before the really big explosions reach this area. As if summoned by his words, Martinez's improvised communicator crackled to life with a burst of static that gradually resolved into a human voice. Chun, this is Retrieval 7. Your extraction team is standing by, but we're having trouble locating your signal. Confirm your position and status. Martinez grabbed the device, her voice tight with urgency. Retrieval 7. This is Sergeant Martinez. We are on the ridge line, approximately 2 kilometers east of the original landing zone, with 67 civilian refugees requiring immediate evacuation. Our position is under attack, and we have multiple nuclear-scale detonations in progress below our position. The response came back immediately. Copy that, Martinez. We have visual on the explosions, but cannot locate your specific position. Can you provide a signal marker? Chun looked around their defensive position, calculating rapidly. They had no flares, no signal devices, and no way to mark their position except... Jackson, he called, how much ammunition do you have left for that Devourer Claw launcher? Maybe 6 rounds. Why? Because we're going to use them as signal flares. What followed was a display of improvised signaling that would probably have impressed military academicians across the galaxy, if any of them had been present to witness it. Jackson used the Devourer weapon system to launch explosive projectiles in a precise geometric pattern that was visible from orbit, creating a clear marker for the extraction team, while simultaneously disrupting the approaching alien forces. The extraction ship, a heavy assault transport designed for combat recovery operations, appeared over the ridge line like an angel of deliverance. Its pilot, apparently unconcerned by the ongoing explosions below or the hostile fire from Devourer positions, brought the craft down in a landing pattern that would have been considered reckless under normal circumstances, but looked positively conservative compared to what the humans have been doing all day. All aboard! The pilot's voice came through their communicators. We got incoming company, and this whole area is about to become very inhospitable. The evacuation proceeded with the same mechanical efficiency that had characterized the entire mission. The Zilani civilians were loaded aboard the transport in groups of 10, with Martinez providing medical support for the most seriously injured. Thompson and Jackson maintained defensive positions to cover the loading process, while Chen coordinated with the ship's crew to optimize the evacuation sequence. Zethkar found himself assigned to the final group, watching as the last of the Zilani civilians were safely aboard the transport. As he prepared to board himself, he turned back for one final look at the landscape below. The facility was completely gone, replaced by a growing crater that continued to expand as Thompson's demolition charges completed their work. The Devourer forces that had been approaching their position had either been destroyed by the ongoing explosions or driven back by the combination of human defensive fire and environmental hazards. "Commander," Chun called from the transport's ramp, "time to go." As they lifted off, Zethkar watched the alien landscape fall away beneath them. The mission had been a complete success. The Devourer facility was destroyed, their intelligence had been transmitted to coalition forces, 67 civilians had been rescued, and the human team had suffered only minor casualties. By any rational military assessment, it should have been impossible. But as he looked around the transport's cabin at the 4 humans who had made it possible, Zethkar began to understand that impossible was a concept his species might need to reconsider. The debriefing aboard the GDC flagship Eternal Vigil should have been a routine after-action report. Commander Zethkar had participated in hundreds of them over his career, methodically reviewing mission objectives, tactical decisions, and lessons learned for future operations. But as he sat in the sterile conference room watching Captain Chun deliver his report with the same calm professionalism he had shown during the mission, Zethkar realized that nothing about this experience had been routine. Admiral Thexvor listened in increasingly stunned silence as Chun described their penetration of the Devourer facility, the intelligence they had gathered, and the rescue of 67 Zilani civilians. Her multiple eyes flickered between the data displays, showing the complete destruction of the enemy installation and the medical reports from the rescued prisoners. "Captain Chun," she finally said, her translator struggling slightly with what might have been disbelief. "You're reporting that a 4-person team infiltrated a major Devourer stronghold, gathered critical intelligence on their expansion plans, destroyed the entire facility, and rescued nearly 70 civilian prisoners while suffering only minor casualties?" "That's correct, Admiral. And you accomplished this while being outnumbered by approximately 300 to 1. The exact ratio varied depending on the engagement, but that's a reasonable average." Admiral Thexvor turned to Zethkar, her expression demanding confirmation of what seemed impossible. "Commander, can you verify this report?" Zethkar found himself in the unusual position of needing to convince his superior officer that what sounded like fiction was actually fact. "Every word is accurate, Admiral. If anything, Captain Chen's report understates the scope of what they accomplished. The intelligence data that Martinez had extracted from the Devourer communication networks had already been transmitted to Coalition High Command, triggering the largest defensive mobilization in galactic history. 12 separate task forces were being deployed to intercept the alien attack flotillas, while additional forces moved to reinforce the targeted worlds. "The strategic implications are enormous," reported Colonel Vextan, the expedition's intelligence chief. The Devourers weren't just expanding randomly. They had identified every major coalition stronghold and were preparing coordinated strikes designed to cripple our entire defensive infrastructure. "Estimated casualties if the attacks had proceeded as planned?" the Admiral asked. "Conservative estimate, 47 billion dead in the initial assault, with total civilization collapse within 6 months. The silence that followed was profound. Every being in the conference room understood that they were discussing the near extinction of galactic civilization, prevented by the actions of 4 humans who had volunteered for what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission. "Captain Chun," Admiral Thexvor said carefully, "perhaps you could explain how your people achieved these results? Our tactical analyses suggested that penetrating a Devourer stronghold would require a minimum of battalion strength with heavy support elements. Chin's expression didn't change, but Zethkar caught something in his eyes that reminded him of their earlier conversation about what humans considered worse than the Devourers. Admiral, with respect, your tactical analyses were based on conventional approaches to warfare. Humans have been developing unconventional approaches for a very long time. Meaning that where we come from, the galaxy was a dangerous place long before we met the Devourers. We learned to adapt. Over the next several hours, Zethkar watched as the full scope of human capabilities began to emerge through careful questioning and cross-referencing of mission data. The records painted a picture of a species that approached warfare with a fundamentally different mindset than any other known civilization. Where most species developed military doctrine around technological superiority and numerical advantage, humans had evolved tactics that assumed technological inferiority and numerical disadvantage. Where other civilizations sought to minimize casualties and preserve resources, humans were willing to accept enormous risks if the strategic payoff justified them. Where galactic military tradition emphasized careful planning and predictable outcomes, humans thrived in chaos and uncertainty. Dr. Kalen Thex, the expedition's xenobiologist, had spent the return journey analyzing biological samples from the rescued Zilani civilians. Her findings were disturbing in their implications. The Devourers have developed a new strain of bioweapon specifically designed to break down crystalline structures, she reported. If they had deployed it against the Vrek's homeworld as planned, the resulting casualties would have been total. 12 billion beings dissolve alive. Time frame for deployment. Akmihad Texfo asked. Based on the biological development indicators, they were perhaps 18 hours away from field testing, maybe 24 at the outside. The precision of the timing was almost unbelievable. If the human team had been delayed by even a few hours, or if their mission had failed at any point, the consequences would have been catastrophic not just for the Vreks but for the entire coalition. There's something else, Dr. Kalen Thex continued, her voice troubled. The bioweapon shows clear signs of having been designed using detailed knowledge of coalition biology. The Devourers didn't just stumble onto this. They were specifically targeting our physiological weaknesses, meaning they have access to classified biological data that should only exist in our most secure databases. Either they've developed intelligence, gathering capabilities we didn't know about, or she didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone in the room understood the implication. There was a security breach somewhere in the coalition command structure. Captain Shun spoke for the first time in over an hour. Admiral, my people would like to volunteer for follow-up operations to investigate this breach. Admiral Thexvor studied the human carefully. Captain, you and your team have already accomplished more than anyone had a right to expect. Perhaps it would be appropriate to assign fresh personnel to continue the investigation. With respect, Admiral, fresh personnel don't understand how the Devourers think. We've been inside their heads, seen how they operate, learned their patterns. That experience might be valuable. Zethkar watched the exchange with growing unease. There was something in Chin's tone that suggested this wasn't just professional dedication. There was something personal about the humans' interest in continuing the fight against the Devourers. Very well, the Admiral decided. Your team will coordinate with our intelligence services to develop follow-up operations. But I want you to understand, Captain, what you accomplished on Kepler 442b was extraordinary, but it was also extremely dangerous. The odds of repeating such success are minimal. Chin's smile was back, that cold expression that never quite reached his eyes. Admiral, where we come from, extraordinary and dangerous are just Tuesday. Over the following days, as the Eternal Vigil made its way back to Coalition space, Zethkar found himself spending increasing amounts of time with the human team. What he discovered fundamentally altered his understanding not just of humanity, but of the nature of warfare itself. The humans didn't train the way other species did. Where Kethmori military doctrine emphasized disciplined formations and coordinated tactics, human training focused on individual initiative and adaptive problem-solving. Where most civilized militaries sought to eliminate uncertainty through detailed planning, humans deliberately introduced chaos into their exercises to test their ability to respond to unexpected situations. The thing you have to understand, Sergeant Martinez explained as she demonstrated human close combat techniques, is that our planet was really trying to kill us for most of our evolutionary history. Everything was bigger, stronger, and better armed than we were. We survived by being smarter, faster thinking, and more willing to take risks. Your homeworld, was that dangerous? Zethkar asked. Oh, you have no idea. We shared the planet with creatures that could bite through starship armor, others that could run faster than your ground vehicles, and still others that could camouflage so effectively that you'd never see them coming. Plus natural disasters that could level continents, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, and climate changes that happened so fast that species either adapted or went extinct. Thompson nodded from where he was cleaning his weapons with obsessive precision. By the time we developed civilization, we had already learned that the universe doesn't care about fairness or playing by rules. The only rule that matters is survival, and the only way to guarantee survival is to be better at violence than everything that wants to kill you. Private Jackson looked up from a technical manual he was reading. Plus, we had to compete with other humans. That taught us some really nasty tricks. The casual way they discussed violence as a survival mechanism was deeply disturbing to Zethkar's worldview. His own people had certainly developed effective military capabilities, but always within the context of honorable combat and civilized restraint. The humans seemed to approach warfare as a natural extension of their evolutionary development, with no artificial limitations on what tactics were acceptable. Captain Shun, he asked during one of their conversations, what did you mean when you said you dealt with worse things than the Devourers? Chin was silent for a long moment, studying something in the distance that only he could see. Commander, in our recorded history, humans have survived ice ages that should have driven us extinct, plagues that killed half our population, wars that devastated entire continents, and disasters that would have ended most civilizations. We faced enemies that were stronger, smarter, and better equipped than we were, and we've survived by being willing to do whatever was necessary. The Devourers are dangerous, he continued, but they're predictable. They follow biological imperatives, they operate within logical parameters, and they have limitations. The worst enemies humanity has faced were other humans, beings with the same intelligence and adaptability we have, but with completely different goals and moral frameworks. We learned to fight ourselves, Martinez added quietly. After that, fighting aliens is almost relaxing. The intelligence analysis that followed their return to Coalition space revealed the scope of the security breach that Dr. Kalenthex had suspected. The Devourers had indeed gained access to classified biological databases, but not through conventional espionage. Instead, they had captured and interrogated Coalition personnel from previous engagements, extracting information through methods that were both sophisticated and horrifying. They're learning from us, Colonel Vextan reported during a classified briefing. Every engagement, every prisoner they take, every piece of equipment they capture, they study it all and adapt their tactics accordingly. How many Coalition personnel have they captured? Admiral Texfor asked. Minimum of 200 over the past year, possibly as many as 500, and they've extracted usable intelligence from all of them. We have to assume so. The bioweapon that targeted Vrex physiology was just the beginning. They're developing specific counters to every major Coalition species. Captain Shun had been listening silently, but now he spoke with that same calm authority Zethkar had witnessed during the mission. Admiral, my team would like to volunteer for prisoner recovery operations. Captain, locating and extracting prisoners from Devourer facilities is extremely dangerous work. The odds of success are better with us than with anyone else, Chin interrupted politely. We understand how they think, how they operate, and how to hurt them. More importantly, we understand what captured Coalition personnel are going through. There was something in his tone that made Zethkar wonder if the humans had personal experience with capture and interrogation. Given what he had learned about their homeworld and their history of warfare, it seemed entirely possible. The mission planning that followed was unlike anything in coalition military doctrine. Instead of the careful, methodical approach favored by most civilized militaries, the humans proposed a series of rapid, simultaneous strikes against multiple Devourer facilities, designed to rescue prisoners while gathering intelligence and disrupting enemy operations. The key, Chen explained during one planning session, is to move faster than they can adapt. Hit multiple targets simultaneously, extract prisoners and intelligence, and disappear before they can coordinate a response. And if we encounter resistance, then we kill everything that tries to stop us and keep moving. The casual brutality of the statement was jarring, but Zethkar was beginning to understand that this was simply how humans approach problems that threatened their pack. They didn't waste time on elaborate strategies or civilized restraint. They identified threats and eliminated them with maximum efficiency. Admiral Thex Vor studied the proposed mission parameters with obvious unease. "Captain, what you're describing sounds less like military operations and more like hunting," Chen finished for her. "Yes, Admiral. That's exactly what it is." The first rescue mission launched 3 days later, with expanded human teams supported by coalition special forces units from 12 different species. Zethkar had volunteered to serve as liaison officer, partly from professional duty and partly from a growing fascination with observing humans in their natural element. The target was a Devourer interrogation facility located in an asteroid field in the Outer Rim, where intelligence suggested at least 40 coalition prisoners were being held. The facility was heavily defended and surrounded by natural hazards that made conventional assault extremely difficult. The humans approached it like apex predators hunting prey. Instead of a direct assault, they used the asteroid field itself as camouflage, moving their strike teams through the debris field in small groups that were virtually undetectable to Devourer sensors. They spent 18 hours positioning themselves around the facility, studying patrol patterns, identifying weak points, and planning their assault with meticulous attention to detail. When they finally struck, it was with the coordinated precision of a pack of hunting wolves. Multiple teams hit different sections of the facility simultaneously, creating confusion and preventing effective coordination of the defense. They moved through the alien structure like ghosts, rescuing prisoners and gathering intelligence while systematically eliminating any resistance they encountered. The entire operation lasted 47 minutes from initial breach to final extraction. When it was over, 38 coalition prisoners had been rescued, a massive intelligence database had been captured, and the Devourer facility had been completely destroyed. Human casualties, 0. Ow! Admiral Thex Vor asked when the after-action report was delivered. "Practice," Chen replied simply. "We've been doing this longer than most civilizations have existed." Over the following months, Zethkar participated in 17 more rescue operations, watching as human tactical doctrine began to spread throughout coalition forces. Not the specific techniques. Most species lack the physical and psychological characteristics necessary to replicate human methods, but the underlying philosophy. The concept of asymmetric warfare, using enemy strengths against them while exploiting unexpected weaknesses. The importance of individual initiative and adaptive thinking over rigid adherence to doctrine. The willingness to accept short-term risks for long-term strategic advantages. Most importantly, the understanding that some enemies could not be negotiated with, reasoned with, or defeated through conventional means. Sometimes, survival required becoming something more dangerous than the threat you faced. The war against the Devourers continued for another 2 years, but it was no longer the desperate struggle for survival it had been before human involvement. Coalition forces learned to fight with human tactical principles, while human teams served as elite units capable of operations that other species found impossible. The Devourers, for their part, never fully adapted to human warfare. They were excellent at learning from conventional military tactics, but humans didn't fight conventionally. They fought like the evolutionary apex predators they were, using methods that defied logical analysis because they weren't entirely logical to begin with. They fought with the accumulated wisdom of a species that had clawed its way to dominance on one of the most hostile planets in the galaxy, developing techniques that worked not because they were efficient or elegant, but because they were effective. In the end, that made all the difference. The final battle of the war took place in the Devourer home system, where the aliens had constructed a massive hive complex around their original homeworld. Coalition forces, now trained in human tactical principles and supported by human elite units, penetrated the system's defenses and began systematic destruction of the hive infrastructure. Zethkar, now serving as a senior liaison officer specializing in human operations, watched from the flagship's bridge as Captain Shun led the final assault on the hive complex's central core. The human team moved through the alien structure with the same deadly efficiency they had shown during that first mission on Kepler 442b, but now supported by thousands of coalition troops who had learned to fight like humans. The Devourer resistance collapsed within 6 hours, their hive mind coordination shattered by simultaneous attacks on multiple critical nodes. The surviving aliens retreated into deep space, their expansion halted, and their capacity for coordinated warfare broken. Captain Chun, Admiral Thexvor said, as the human team returned from the final assault, "On behalf of the Galactic Defense Coalition, I want to thank you and your people for everything you've accomplished." Chun nodded politely, but Zethkar noticed that his expression remained serious. "Admiral, the immediate threat is over, but this war taught us something important.